More now on the health of actor Bruce Willis. His family revealing today that Willis is suffering from a disease called frontotemporal dementia.
He's in a very stable place at the moment. I mean, obviously, it's very difficult. It's frontotemporal dementia.
For 25 years, the world believed Bruce Willis and Demi Moore had the perfect ending. A clean divorce, a peaceful co-parenting story, and a rare Hollywood friendship that never turned bitter. But that story was only half true. Because behind the smiles, behind the red carpets, and behind the carefully chosen words was a relationship that never truly ended, only went silent. A bond tested by addiction, betrayal, illness, and time itself. This isn't the story the tabloids told you. This is the story they never could. A love story that never actually ended. For more than 25 years, the world believed Bruce Willis and Demi Moore were proof that divorce did not have to destroy a family. In an industry famous for explosive breakups and lifelong grudges, they stood out as the rare exception, the former couple who seemed to have mastered something most people never could. They appeared together at family events, celebrated milestones side by side, and spoke about one another with a calm respect that felt almost unreal for Hollywood standards. To many, they represented emotional maturity, growth, and the idea that love could transform rather than collapse when a marriage ended. But that version of their story was incomplete. Because while the legal relationship between Bruce and Demi ended on paper, the emotional connection between them never truly disappeared. It didn't vanish with the divorce decree, and it didn't fade with time. Instead, it went quiet, slipping beneath the surface of public appearances and polite interviews, buried under years of unspoken tension, unresolved pain, and choices that would only make sense decades later. What the public mistook for closure was really just silence. Now, as Bruce Willis faces the most devastating chapter of his life, Demi Moore has re-entered the picture in a way that feels impossible to ignore. Her presence has forced people to ask questions they never thought to ask before. Questions about loyalty, about who stays when life stops being glamorous, and about what love looks like when memory itself begins to disappear. This is not a story about rekindling romance or revisiting old scandals. It is a story about endurance, about the ties that survive long after passion fades, and about what remains when time runs out and there is no room left for pretenses. They didn't date for years or test the waters like everyone else. Bruce Willis and Demi Moore met, married, and were expecting a child in just 4 months. And what looked like fate at the time would quietly plant the seeds of everything that later fell apart, when destiny moved too fast to question it. Bruce Willis and Demi Moore did not ease into love. They didn't take time to carefully examine compatibility or plan a future with measured steps. Instead, their relationship unfolded at a pace so fast it felt almost unreal. They met, married, and became pregnant within 4 months. A timeline that defied logic, but felt completely natural to them at the time. Demi later admitted that it all happened before she even had the chance to question it, as though life itself had grabbed her hand and pulled her forward without asking permission. At that moment in her life, Bruce represented something Demi had always craved, but never fully experienced. He was confident, playful, generous, and deeply excited by the idea of becoming a father. There was a warmth about him that made the future feel safe and predictable, something Demi had rarely known growing up. Her childhood had been shaped by instability, addiction, and fear, and the promise of building a stable family felt like the ultimate triumph over her past. Motherhood came easily to her. Being responsible for a child grounded her in a way fame and success never could. It gave her a sense of purpose that went beyond career or public approval. Together, she and Bruce built a life that looked like a modern fairy tale. They were successful, admired, and seemingly in sync, raising 3 daughters while navigating Hollywood with a balance of fame and normalcy that few couples ever achieved. But beneath the surface of that perfect image, differences were quietly forming. Bruce thrived in being the center of the universe. He was comfortable occupying space, commanding attention, and playing the role of the dominant figure both at home and in public. Demi, however, had spent her entire life learning how to survive by remaining emotionally independent. She loved Bruce deeply, but she never believed in surrendering herself completely to another person's identity. Instead of merging fully into his world, she maintained a sense of distance, not out of disinterest, but out of self-preservation. She later described this emotional boundary as building a moat around a castle, a protective barrier that ensured she would never become dependent on anyone else for her sense of worth. That distance allowed her to survive, but it also created a quiet tension that never fully resolved. They fought like any couple does, reconciled, laughed, and raised their children with care. Yet over time, it became clear that love alone could not erase the fundamental differences in how they viewed life. Bruce wanted a world where family came before everything else, where outside ambitions took a back seat. Demi refused to shrink herself into a single role, no matter how meaningful that role was. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the gap between them widened. And while neither of them failed the marriage in a dramatic way, the realization settled in that wanting different things was enough to pull them apart. They swore nothing would ever come before their children, and for a while, they proved it. But what happens when love moves on? Emotions change, and keeping that promise becomes harder than breaking it. The promise that turned them into Hollywood's favorite exes. When Bruce Willis and Demi Moore announced the end of their 11-year marriage, the news sent shockwaves through Hollywood. They were not just another celebrity couple, they were a symbol of stability in an unstable industry. Yet what followed the announcement was even more surprising than the divorce itself. Instead of bitterness, public accusations, or carefully worded statements filled with hidden resentment, they made a promise that felt almost revolutionary. Their children would come first. Always. And for a long time, that promise was more than words. They co-parented with intention and care, showing up together for birthdays, school events, graduations, and holidays, ensuring their daughters never felt caught between 2 separate worlds. They spoke about each other with respect, refusing to let personal disappointment rewrite the story of what they had built together. To the outside world, they appeared healed, evolved, and emotionally mature beyond the norm. Hollywood loved them for it. They became the blueprint for how divorce was supposed to work. But life does not freeze simply because a promise is made. As the years passed, Demi began to feel a quiet restlessness she couldn't ignore. She had given everything to motherhood and family, and while she loved her daughters fiercely, she felt parts of herself slipping away. When she met Ashton Kutcher, the connection felt electric, not just because of romance, but because of what he represented. With him, she felt young again, free from the weight of expectation and the invisible rules that had shaped her first marriage. It wasn't just love. It felt like a chance to reclaim time, to experience joy without the constant reminder of who she was supposed to be. The public reaction was swift and cruel. Demi was ridiculed relentlessly, reduced to headlines that mocked her age and questioned her sanity. She was painted as a woman desperately chasing youth, her happiness framed as something embarrassing rather than valid. Every appearance, every smile, every affectionate moment was scrutinized and criticized. And then Bruce did something that exposed the hypocrisies completely. When he fell in love again, the narrative shifted effortlessly, setting the stage for a contrast that would quietly reshape everything that followed. For years after his divorce from Demi Moore, Bruce Willis publicly insisted that marriage was no longer something he wanted. He spoke openly about how deeply his first marriage had shaped him, and how committed he was to protecting his daughters from instability. To many people, Bruce seemed settled, grounded, and uninterested in repeating the past. He was focused on work, fatherhood, and maintaining the calm co-parenting relationship that had earned him so much respect. Then he met Emma Hemming. The shift was immediate, almost unsettling in its certainty. Bruce later admitted that the night he met Emma, he knew he would marry her. There was no hesitation, no long period of doubt, no slow unraveling into love. It was instinctive, decisive, and absolute, echoing the way his relationship with Demi had begun decades earlier. But this time, the world reacted very differently. Emma was young, striking, and largely removed from the complicated emotional history Bruce carried. Their relationship was framed as refreshing rather than reckless, as romantic rather than impulsive. When they married, the coverage was celebratory. When they welcomed children, the narrative became almost reverent. Bruce was portrayed as a man rediscovering joy, a devoted husband entering a beautiful second chapter of life. What went mostly unspoken was the contrast. Years earlier, Demi had been humiliated for loving a younger man, reduced to caricatures of desperation and midlife crisis. Her choices were questioned, her motives scrutinized, and her happiness treated like something temporary and embarrassing. Bruce, however, was applauded for making nearly the same decision. The double standard was glaring, but it passed without resistance. Demi watched all of this unfold quietly. She did not lash out, correct the narrative, or demand fairness. Instead, she retreated inward, determined to live her life without letting resentment poison what she had left. On the surface, it looked like acceptance. In reality, it was endurance. But endurance has limits. The pregnancy that felt like redemption. At 42 years old, Demi Moore believed she had finally reached a moment of balance. She was engaged to Ashton Kutcher, deeply invested in the idea of starting fresh and pregnant. The pregnancy carried meaning far beyond biology. To Demi, it felt like proof that her life was still moving forward, that she was not defined by loss or age or the mistakes of her past. She described feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. The future felt open again. She imagined another child not as a replacement for anything she had lost, but as a continuation of love, a symbol of hope that things could still be built, even later in life. Then came the doctor's appointment. Demi would later say that before a single word was spoken, she already knew. The look on the doctor's face told her everything. There was no heartbeat, no ambiguity, no gentle way to soften the reality. The silence in that room became permanent, freezing the moment into something she would never escape. The loss destroyed her sense of safety. It wasn't just grief. It was shame. Demi convinced herself that the miscarriage was her fault, that her body had failed because she had waited too long, that she had been arrogant to believe she could have another child. The guilt wrapped itself around her identity, erasing logic and compassion. Instead of allowing herself to mourn openly, she turned inward, consumed by the idea that she had broken something irreparable. She lost sight of the family she already had, unable to see past the pain of what she believed she had failed to create. Ashton, meanwhile, grieved differently. Where Demi needed connection and reassurance, he withdrew. His silence felt like abandonment, and his inability to sit with her pain deepened the emotional distance between them. They were no longer moving through the loss together. They were moving away from each other. And in that fragile space, something catastrophic happened. The discovery didn't come through a dramatic confrontation or whispered confession. It came through technology, a Google alert, a notification that shattered what little stability Demi had left. When she confronted Ashton, there was no denial. He admitted the infidelity immediately. The honesty didn't soften the blow. It made it worse. There was no confusion to cling to, no misunderstanding to resolve. The truth stood naked and undeniable, stripping her of the last illusion she had been holding on to. The betrayal hit her physically. She later described feeling unable to breathe, as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. This wasn't just about cheating. It was about timing, about betrayal layered on top of grief, abandonment layered on top of shame. It was the final crack in a foundation that had already been dangerously unstable. That was the moment the door reopened. For nearly 20 years, Demi had stayed sober, fighting daily against the pull of addiction that had shaped her childhood. But the pain became unbearable, and sobriety began to feel like cruelty rather than strength. She didn't drink to celebrate or escape responsibility. She drank because she didn't want to exist inside her own mind anymore. What followed was not a slow decline. It was a collapse. Demi tried to outrun her suffering, but addiction has a way of dragging everything into the light. The drinking escalated quickly, and control slipped through her fingers faster than she could acknowledge. The pain she had refused to face sober returned amplified, distorted, and uncontrollable. Then came the night that would change her relationship with her family forever. A leaked 911 call captured a moment of absolute terror. Demi's body was out of control, her movements frantic, her mind disconnected from reality. But what made the moment unbearable was not the loss of dignity or privacy. It was her daughter watching, frozen in fear, convinced she was about to witness her mother die. That image would haunt all of them. Bruce, who had spent years maintaining stability for their daughters, could no longer ignore the danger. Love and compassion were no longer enough. Survival became the priority. Demi was taken to rehab, not gently, not gradually, but urgently, because the alternative was unthinkable. For Demi, the aftermath felt surreal. She had always believed that no matter how much she struggled, her children would understand. That belief was about to be shattered. The silence that followed was worse than any headline. Rehab saved Demi's life, but it cost her access to the people she loved most. Bruce and their daughters made a decision that broke all of them in different ways. They stepped back. They stopped answering calls. They created distance that felt brutal but necessary. To Demi, it felt like abandonment. To her daughters, it felt like protection. One of them later described the experience as feeling like the sun had gone down, as though the mother they knew had vanished and been replaced by something frightening and unpredictable. The trust that had once felt unbreakable was gone, replaced by fear and confusion. For 3 years, Demi lived without her children speaking to her. The silence was devastating. It echoed the trauma of her own childhood, where addiction had repeatedly taken her mother away. She saw herself becoming the very thing she had sworn never to be, repeating a cycle she thought she had escaped. Anger came first, then shame, then finally, a terrifying clarity. She had reached the bottom. As Demi Moore sat alone in the aftermath of being cut off from her children, something she had avoided her entire life began to surface. The pain she was feeling wasn't new. It was familiar, almost scripted, as if her adult collapse had been rehearsed decades earlier in a childhood shaped by instability, addiction, and fear. For the first time, she couldn't outrun it. Demi had grown up in a home where alcohol dictated everything. Both her parents battled addiction, and chaos was the default state of her childhood. Stability wasn't something she lost later in life. It was something she never truly had. By the time she was 12 years old, her mother had already attempted self-harm, and Demi found herself doing something no child should ever have to do. She used her small fingers to dig pills out of her mother's mouth, desperately trying to save her life while still a child herself. And it didn't happen just once. There were many nights like that, moments where Demi learned far too early that love could be terrifying, that caretaking could mean survival, and that safety was never guaranteed. Childhood didn't feel like childhood. It felt like vigilance. It felt like waiting for the next disaster and preparing yourself emotionally before it arrived. Those experiences shaped everything that came after. They taught Demi how to stay alert, how to perform strength even when she was terrified, and how to keep moving forward without ever stopping long enough to feel the pain. She didn't heal from her childhood trauma. She outran it, using success, relationships, and motherhood as proof that she was different, that she had escaped the cycle. But trauma doesn't disappear just because life looks good on the outside. When Demi lost her pregnancy at 42, when her marriage collapsed under betrayal, and when addiction reclaimed her, it wasn't a new story unfolding. It was the same story resurfacing, demanding to be acknowledged at last. When her daughters walked away, the illusion finally shattered. Being cut off from her children wasn't just painful, it was annihilating. Motherhood had always been the one role Demi believed she had succeeded at without question. Fame had been complicated, relationships had been imperfect, but being a mother felt sacred, certain, and real. Losing contact with her daughters forced her to confront a terrifying question she had never allowed herself to ask before. If the one thing she believed she had done right was gone, then who was she? Her daughters didn't leave out of anger. They left out of fear. They didn't recognize the woman she had become, and that realization hurt more than any criticism ever could. To them, she wasn't safe, and that truth cut deeper than addiction itself. Demi felt villainized by her own family. She felt misunderstood, abandoned, and enraged that Bruce refused to intervene. In her mind, he was choosing distance over compassion, silence over support. But what Demi couldn't see at the time was that Bruce wasn't punishing her. He was protecting their children. Bruce had always been consistent in one thing: the kids came first. And in this moment, protecting them meant letting Demi fall without cushioning the impact. There came a moment, quiet and unremarkable on the surface, when Demi finally understood the crossroads she was standing at. There was no dramatic intervention, no cinematic breakdown, just a terrifying clarity that settled in slowly and refused to leave. She realized that if nothing changed, this was how her life would end. Alone, isolated, cut off from the people she loved most. Not because they didn't care, but because she was unsafe to love. For the first time, she stopped blaming everyone else. She stopped focusing on betrayal, abandonment, and injustice. Instead, she asked the hardest question of her life. How did I get here? And even more frightening, what part did I play in it? That question demanded honesty she had never allowed herself before. It required her to look beyond addiction as a symptom and confront the fear that had driven her since childhood. Fear of being unwanted, fear of being abandoned, fear of not being enough. She understood then that she had been running her entire life, trying to prove that she deserved to exist, that she was worth being born, that she mattered. And in that constant motion, she had never learned how to be present. There was no way forward without stopping. This time, Demi didn't treat recovery as a temporary fix or a public redemption arc. There were no grand announcements, no polished interviews designed to reassure the world. Instead, she did something far more difficult. She sat still. She went inward, confronting memories she had spent decades avoiding. She unpacked the fear that had shaped her relationships, the emotional armor she had mistaken for strength, and the need for validation that had quietly controlled her choices. Healing, she learned, wasn't about fixing herself. It was about understanding herself. For the first time, Demi stopped trying to be strong. She allowed herself to feel afraid without numbing it. She allowed herself to feel ashamed without running from it. She stopped chasing approval and started asking whether her actions aligned with who she wanted to be. It was slow, it was uncomfortable, and it was lonely. But something shifted. The version of Demi they had been waiting for. When Demi finally re-emerged, she wasn't dramatically different. There was no sudden transformation that could be captured in headlines. The change was subtle, almost invisible. She listened more. She reacted less. She stopped trying to control how others saw her. And gradually, her daughters noticed. They saw a woman who was present instead of defensive, honest instead of performative, safe instead of unpredictable. The trust didn't return all at once. It came in fragments, in cautious conversations, in boundaries that were respected instead of challenged. Bruce noticed too. He saw the version of Demi that had always existed beneath the chaos. The woman who had once helped him learn how to slow down and be present in his own life. He had never stopped caring about her, but now he could finally trust her again. The family began to reconnect, not by erasing the past, but by acknowledging it fully. Bruce Willis had always been known for playing tough, unbreakable characters, but the people closest to him knew that his real strength lay in something quieter. He understood that fear didn't disappear when you ignored it. It grew. Even when he stepped back from Demi during her darkest years, he never truly abandoned her. He simply refused to enable her destruction. He waited, not with impatience, but with boundaries. And when Demi finally returned as herself, not running, not hiding, not proving, Bruce was there. When time ran out and the truth had nowhere left to hide. When Bruce Willis spoke about having another 25 years of action films left in him, it wasn't bravado. It was belief. He had built a career on strength, resilience, and invincibility. And even as age crept in, he still saw himself as someone who could outrun time. But time doesn't announce when it's about to take everything. It simply begins, quietly, cruelly, and without permission. The diagnosis came like a verdict no one was prepared to hear. Frontotemporal dementia, a disease so rare and so devastating that many had never even heard its name. Unlike memory-based dementia, this illness attacks personality, language, and behavior, stripping away the very traits that make a person recognizable. For Bruce, a man whose identity had always been tied to presence and charisma, it was a devastating blow. As the news became public, his family spoke out for him, explaining that he would be stepping away from acting, that his condition would worsen, and that the future would look very different than anyone had imagined. The world mourned the loss of an icon, but behind the scenes, something far more complicated was unfolding. Public attention quickly shifted toward Bruce's wife, Emma Hemming. Suddenly, she wasn't just the woman standing beside him. She became the focal point of scrutiny, suspicion, and cruelty. People questioned her motives, her emotions, and even her right to grieve. Online commentary accused her of seeking attention, of exaggerating her pain, of benefiting from Bruce's decline. Some went even further, spreading rumors that his will had been changed just days before his diagnosis, implying manipulation, greed, and betrayal. The speculation was relentless. And then came the photos. Bruce Willis and Demi Moore, together again. Almost instantly, the narrative exploded. Headlines asked whether they were back together, whether Demi had moved in, whether Emma had been pushed aside. The public couldn't comprehend a reality where love didn't operate on jealousy or competition. To many, there had to be a villain. Emma, exhausted and grieving, finally spoke out, pushing back against the cruelty with raw honesty. She admitted she cried every morning. She admitted she was overwhelmed. She admitted that strength was not something she chose, but something forced upon her by circumstance. And then Demi did something no one expected. She defended her. Demi Moore, who had once been reduced to tabloid mockery herself, stepped forward to shut down the rumors. She clarified that Bruce had not abandoned his wife or children, that Emma was not excluded, and that the family was not divided. Bruce had spent time with Demi and their daughters first, and then Emma and their young children joined them once school obligations allowed. There was no rivalry, no power struggle, no replacement. There was only family. Demi publicly praised Emma as a devoted mother, calling her a sister, emphasizing that motherhood had united them rather than divided them. It was a statement that shattered the narrative people wanted to believe, because it refused to give them conflict. What emerged instead was something far more uncomfortable and far more real. A blended family navigating an impossible situation with grace, compassion, and mutual respect. As Bruce's condition progressed, Demi's presence became constant but understated. She wasn't there to reclaim a role or rewrite history. She was there because she understood Bruce in a way few others could. She knew his fears, his silences, and the parts of him that existed beyond language. She had loved him in his prime and respected him in his decline, and that continuity mattered. Emma, carrying the daily weight of caregiving, did not resist Demi's presence. She welcomed it, because this was never about ownership. It was about support, about surrounding Bruce with familiarity, history, and love in every form available. Together, they redefined what family looked like. Bruce and Demi's daughters stood at the center of it all, watching their parents choose cooperation over chaos, compassion over resentment. And then, life added another chapter no one could have predicted. Rumor Willis announced she was expecting a baby. Suddenly, amid illness and uncertainty, there was new life. Bruce and Demi became grandparents, welcoming a granddaughter into a family that had already survived more than most. Bruce joked about needing male energy in a household full of daughters, but beneath the humor was something deeper: perspective. Compared to raising children, everything else faded into insignificance. For Demi, becoming a grandmother brought clarity. She reflected on suffering, on triumph, and on the choices people make when faced with both. She spoke not with regret, but with understanding, expressing hope that by knowing her story, her children might better understand themselves and learn to love themselves more fully. That, in the end, was Demi Moore's revelation. Like if you believe some bonds don't disappear just because a marriage ends. Subscribe for more deep dive stories that go beyond headlines and uncover the human truth behind fame. And comment below, do you think Demi's return was about love, loyalty, or something even deeper? Something